Hello and welcome everyone to the session How Zero to Hero, how SAP creates awesome mobile enterprise apps. I'm glad you're here. I hope you had some interesting sessions so far. And I'd say let's start right away. My name is Philip Pincanello. I'm a mobile developer and IT consultant within SAP. And I've been part of the enterprise mobility team where we migrated our mobile device fleet a couple of years ago to Jamf Pro. And we are also developing in-house applications for our colleagues of various categories. And so this session won't be about mobile devices really, but more focus on applications. And there's something really specific when it comes to mobile enterprise applications. And of course, that is the MDM system in the backend. So apps can leverage some features of MDM, and that makes them a real winner for all colleagues and customers that use your solutions. So to talk more about what's coming in this session, we'll be first discuss why even bother with developing an application, a native application for that matter. And after that, we'll talk more about MDM features that are easy to develop while having a great outcome. And once you start developing your application, you also want to scale the app development with others in a big team, for example, or you want to ship them to first beta testers or something like that. And for that, you should use a modern CI/CD workflow, and how that can look like, we'll talk about. And the last step would be to deliver and distribute the application. Now, of course, this really depends on the target audience that your app should be distributed to. But we'll deliver two major types of distribution, the internal and the external distribution. But before we start, some key facts about SAP. Some of you may know SAP, of course, since we've been part of Jamf Nation a while now. We are currently managing around 86,000 iOS and iPadOS devices globally with Jamf Pro. And we also, as already mentioned, developing, managing, and distributing around 70 internal applications. You can see them below. There are just some examples, of course. And with them, we also have mobile apps solutions for customer systems, such as SAP Concur or SAP SuccessFactors. So the major question that you should always ask yourself is, why even bother with applications? Now, that is a great question if you want to convince someone why you should develop an app. But the answer is actually quite simple. Users are already using apps personally. They most likely have a smartphone, and to consume services, they're probably using some kind of apps. And not just that they know what they're doing with applications, they also love the native device features that come with applications. So compared to a web service or a website that you would just open and navigate through, you can actually leverage the device features such as camera, push notifications, or even some widgets on the home screen, for example. And that really comes to play with what users really want. They want to stay up to date. They want to have the latest information when they arrive and not a day later when they look at it. So just take the phone, for example. You have your widget on there with the newest information for the deal that you're currently closing, or for the activity that you currently were working on. And so it's really important that you understand from a development perspective that you have a user-centric development. And what you want to create is actually a customer-like experience, consumer-like experience. A consumer-like experience means that a user normally, of course, the UI will give it away, but normally couldn't tell if the app was built for the end user or for an organization. And in order to achieve that, well, there's quote unquote a simple process. It's called the DevOps process, of course. And as you can see, there are multiple steps in this circle, and we'll go through them step by step. So the first thing when you develop an application is you want to communicate your idea. Let's say there's a colleague of yours that comes to you and say, hey, I have a great app idea. Can we develop that? So you would grab your resources that you have, you would plan out the application, and you would just start develop, of course. And now, as the app grows, you need to have some kind of scale the application development system as well. So we go the first three steps. You communicate, you plan, you develop, as mentioned. And of course, you have different and various tools for that. Those are really just examples. And then you want to scale them and use other systems to make sure that there's a certain level of quality achieved within your application. And once you do that, you also integrate with other components to test your application. So, of course, there can be a security scan, there can be a UI test. You can generate multiple reports, which is really important if you publish your application and you want to make sure that the quality of your code and also the features of the application work as intended. And once you start to think about the release, you actually want to consider how to release your application. Now, there are multiple tools available, of course, depending on where you want to release your app. For example, in the App Store, or maybe just internally, or you want to distribute that through TestFlight as a beta test. And then you want to monitor the application, of course. You want to make sure that you get the feedback from users, see where they have issues, maybe operating your application, or if there are issues with the application in general. And you want to make sure to fix that. So that's where the circle really closes. It turns back around and starts from fresh. You get feedback from users that you want to implement, and you start from the beginning. So that's an overview of the whole process. We'll just start with the development of iOS and iPadOS applications. And as mentioned, those are really just examples. And we don't want to focus on low-level coding or what it means to develop an iOS and iPadOS application. Those Swift UI, Objective-C code level information, you can find tons of them in the internet, of course. But we really want to focus what makes enterprise applications unique in this regards. And that is, of course, the MDM feature set that is available. And an important thing is that every enterprise application should be aware of MDM capabilities. And just to name a few, we want to go through some of them right here. So the first one would be managed AppConfig, and we'll get to that later in real detail. With managed AppConfig, you can customize your application without any code changes. Then the second feature would be an MDM API that is normally unavailable for users that don't use an MDM system, of course. And what that means is that an application that you develop can communicate back to the system and get the latest device information. That might be information that is usually missing if you're running on device. Or you can even send MDM commands to control the device to a certain degree. The third feature are configuration payloads. Now, there are, of course, tons of different configuration payloads, so I just named a few right here. The first one would be the single app mode. Some of you may already use that feature. It's very similar to the guided access on your device. So if you lock your device in guided access, it can open anything else than the application. However, with guided access, if you have access to the device and all its buttons, you can actually exit that. With the single app mode, on the other hand, you won't be able to do that. Once that's implemented and set up, you cannot access the application whatsoever. You can only reboot the device, but after reboot, it will automatically start the single app mode again. So that's one handy feature for an onboarding application, for example. An employee that just started in your organization and you want to make sure that he reads the information, you can force them to open the app and exit them whenever you think it's ready. The second payload would be a notification payload. So normally when an application from an end user is opened, he will get this pop-up, this app would like to send you a notification, right? So with the notification payload, you can actually preset this information. So you don't have to annoy the user with a pop-up like that. Of course, you shouldn't use that to spam your users, but it's actually quite handy, for example, if you have an emergency application where you want to make sure that the notifications are enabled for every device that you manage. And once that's done, every user can receive the notification without being annoyed from the pop-up in the beginning. And then we have, of course, multiple security payloads. There are various payloads that fall into this category. So just to name a few, for example, is the SSO extension. The Microsoft Authenticator app is doing a great job with that. Once activated, you can log in just once, and in the background, it will share the credentials with other applications. So you don't have to log in again. Also, you could use the certificate SDK provided by Jamf, which allows you to import a user SSO certificate without the need to log in manually again. And then there are, of course, different payloads that are not really app specific, but more device specific, where you can say, okay, the managed document restriction, for example, which denies access to non-managed data sources that can be imported to your application. Or you can simply set allow and disallow apps lists for your apps. But getting back to the managed app configuration, as I already mentioned, it's really easy to implement, and it enables the customization without any code change. There are really endless possibilities right here, of course, limited to what your app actually does and what you want to achieve with the managed app configuration. It's supported by the majority of MDM solutions, and a lot of apps already have that implemented. So as you can see, Microsoft Outlook, the Slack app, the Zoom app, even the self-service app has the AppConfig capability enabled. And from a technical standpoint, it's actually just an XML directory, which contains key value pairs for the information that you would like to send to devices. You can see on the screenshot right here, which is taken from Jamf Pro, that there's a specific tab in the app entry where you can add the app configuration. Once you've seen this once, you can do it for any application, really. It's just important to make sure that the supported key value list is actually communicated by the vendor or the developer of the application. So there need to be any kind of documentation that lists the features that are supported through AppConfig. So that is from a technical IT administrative standpoint. But what does it really mean from an application standpoint or an end user standpoint? We can see that right here. This is a really basic Swift UI application. It doesn't really do anything. It's just to illustrate the capabilities of AppConfig, really. There is a title screen that says Hello World. There's an image of the world. There's some more information text, and then there's a button on the bottom. So this is the generic application. This would be the way it would be distributed through the App Store to a direct end user if they bought it with their own Apple ID and the device is not managed by MDM. But now, in this application, it's implemented to check for the managed app configuration. So if there is a specific payload available, it will check the values of specific keys and replace them in their view, which means that without any code change, the app can look completely different. For example, like that. So as you can see, it now says, hello, Philip, because I sent the app my name via AppConfig. I have a specific image that is pointing to a URL. It also says now log in with SSO, pointing to a specific URL. And of course, the whole background color is completely different. I changed that with a specific hex code of a color. So both of these applications that you can see right now are sharing the very same code base. The only thing different is the AppConfig sent from an MDM system. So that's also really great. And you can, as I mentioned, be really creative with that. You can send a lot of configuration, not just visually, but also in the backend. Communicate to specific API endpoints. You could, in theory, send service accounts, credentials with them so that the user don't even have to log in to see specific information if it's not tied to the user. However, there are some limitations. Managed app config should not, for example, override the user decisions. Let's say you already have an application that you now implement AppConfig into. If you send out the update, you want to make sure to not, for example, log out the user and log them back in. That would be unnecessary. If the user has already made the decision to log in with a specific user, you should leave the app the way it is. Only if the user is doing a fresh onboarding, you give them the option, hey, I noticed that you're managed by an MDM system. Would you like to proceed with this and this? So that's one way to do it without the intrusive decision-making process. Another thing you shouldn't do is hide features behind a paywall. So while AppConfig can be used to hide specific features or to enable, maybe have a soft launch of specific features, it should not be that you distribute specific features that are only paid by, and then you give them the key value pair needed to activate these features. That's not the intended way for AppConfig to be used. And then also, it should not be the single point of truth. App configuration will be distributed from Apple through APNS, so it won't be available in real time on the device. It will be sent out during installation, but if you send it out later or you change it, for example, it will take a while before every device in your device fleet will get the latest information from AppConfig. So you want to make sure that you have you are prepared in your app when the AppConfig is not up to date and it's not the correct information. You could use another backend service, for example, to make sure that the values are correct. So that's AppConfig, but in combination with other features, it gets even better. So for example, let's take the direct communication to an MDM server. You can get device information like the device name, maybe the user's phone number, for example, or a serial number, which are usually unavailable on the device directly. You can also send direct MDM commands to the device. So for example, you have a troubleshoot application, you're developing a troubleshoot application where the user are allowed to clear their own passcodes. You could do that if you implement the direct MDM communication. Now, compared to AppConfig, the direct MDM communication is a bit trickier because they're way different compared to the AppConfig. App configuration is a unified standard across multiple MDM systems, whereas the API can be different depending from system to system. Another thing you could consider using the direct communication and the app config would be to enable and disable the single app mode. Let's say the single app mode is started automatically once the app is opened. To do that, you would start the application. The application would send a command to the MDM server to tell them, hey, I need the policy for the single app mode for this application now. And once that process is done, the same app can exit their own single app mode again. So that's for the complete onboarding flow. We have a good example for that within SAP, and this app is called iOS Assist. So the iOS Assist app for everyone is basically very simple. It just displays numbers about our current device fleet. So you can see how many devices we are currently managing with Jamf Pro, showing an absolute number and categories for different iOS versions that are currently available, if they're supervised or not supervised, and numbers between the different device models. So if it's an iPhone, an iPad, or an Apple TV, for example. Now, what you can see right here is not just generic. It will be dynamically adjusted through AppConfig. So we can specify the keys and the number that are being displayed out of the AppConfig. So let's say there's a new iOS version, we can simply edit the app configuration. It will be pushed out to all devices without the additional need for a code level update. If you're an administrator, you can do even more with the application. You can search for specific devices and leverage the MDM API that is available from Jamf Pro in this case. For that, it will use the advanced search API. You can see the complete device inventory if you have the correct privilege, of course, and you can even send out MDM commands. For example, if a user comes up to you and you're a support colleague, you can tell them, hey, I forgot my passcode because I didn't use the device for a couple of weeks or months. You can simply clear out the passcode with that. So now we are currently developing our application and we need to scale that even more. So what we want to do is look into CI/CD and how we can integrate new features and make sure to deliver that accordingly. So as mentioned before, the development of a mobile application is quite agile. So there are new features around every year after WWDC when a new feature is announced. We want to make sure to adopt the newest features as soon as possible. This will drive adoption, of course, and users will get used to new features way quicker than you can imagine. So you also want to get feedback early and often, not just from your team, of course, who is developing the app, but also from other teams. You want to make sure to cross-reference any different kind of teams that you can get your hands on. And then you want to make sure to have an easy distribution for non-developers. For example, not everyone is as tech-savvy as developers are. So if you send them a QR code where they need to log in and install an IPA file, that's just sometimes too confusing. You want to make sure to have a solution for that. And then another big and important thing to consider is to test your application. For that, we have quite a lot of tools that we can leverage to make sure that the app is tested before release. Just to name a few, to use UI tests, for example. UI tests in Xcode work with a workflow. You have a specific view flow that you want to work through automatically, of course, and see if that the intended workflow that you're imagining is actually doable and possible. One benefit that comes with UI tests is that it automatically makes you focus on accessibility, so that even visually impaired users are capable of using your application. Then, of course, we have the unit tests that will try to communicate with your backend or mock-up service to make sure that your code behaves the way it should. And even if there's an error message from the server, to make sure to handle that correctly. Code scans, of course, are being used to detect vulnerabilities and make sure that your code is secure and the data of users is secure just as well. To give you an example of how we do it within SAP, of course, we start with basic development using Xcode for native iOS and iPadOS applications. Then we start to orchestrate the CI/CD workflow with Jenkins and Azure pipelines. And on dedicated hardware, we are using Fastlane as an open source tool, which of course uses Xcode build underlying. But Fastlane is actually so huge and the community is so great that there are tons of plugins available. So you can use, for example, an automatically screenshot tool that goes through your application, makes a screenshot in different languages for different device types, and generate these images for you. So you can really customize your pipeline the way you want to and get all the results back in the orchestrator. And after you build and test your application, you want to distribute your app. Now, you could use TestFlight for sending the application out to external testers, or the Apps or Connect portal for obviously publishing the app through the App Store. You could use the Visual Studio App Center, which is a solution for Microsoft, for a over-the-air distribution, or you use an MDM system like Jamf Pro to distribute the app to your internal users. And let's talk about this last step a bit more. Now, again, this is just examples. There are more solutions on how to distribute your apps, of course, and depending on your MDM provider, this may vary. But using Jamf Pro and self-service makes it actually quite easy for internal solutions. So we'll talk about that first. Distribute apps internally. Now, with internally, we mean that you have an organization and you're developing an app for this very same organization. And let's say this app now is ready for prime time. You're completely done, your tests look good, and you get the go from the management. The first solution you could use for that would be the custom apps or B2B distribution. Apple prefers this distribution method since it's leveraging the App Store infrastructure and the volume purchase program to buy, even if it's a free application, buy licenses for your own organization. However, the app will go through the review process, so Apple will take a look at your code and make sure that your app works as intended. Now, the alternative to that would be enterprise-signed applications. With enterprise-signed application, the app is directly deployed over an MDM system to your organization. However, you have to make sure that you're prepared for the manual maintenance needed for that. If you sign an app with an enterprise-signed enterprise distribution certificate, you will also need to make sure to use a valid provisioning profile. And you will have to renew that every year. This is different compared to the custom apps and App Store releases, where Apple re-signs your application, so you don't have to do that. So both of those solutions work for internal distribution. However, there are some best practices that I want to give you as well. And the first one would be, even though you might consider to use custom apps or B2B distribution, to still try out the enterprise signing for internal beta testing. So let's say all of your colleagues can use the B2B to consume a specific app. You maybe have the first version ready and you want to distribute that to QA to make sure that the app looks the way it should. And to do that, enterprise signing is a good way, because other than development signing, where you would have to register devices, the QA or PO or whoever can just install the app over the air without any additional setup needed. And also, it's important to scope apps to a specific user group that it matches for. Let's say you develop a sales application. It's usually not needed that this application is available for really anyone within your organization. Scope it to specific user groups makes the self-service even more clear. And also, together with that, you should try to not force install applications. Users tend to be negative when it comes to forced installation on their device. If they don't want the application, they try to delete it maybe, or they just put it in the folder and forget about it. Luckily, now with the newest iOS version, you can hide home screen, so that might not be a huge issue, but it will still take up space on the device, for example. And then something to consider for IT administrators, for example. MDM features might be familiar to you, but not to every mobile developer. So if you have an idea and a feature that you know other apps are leveraging, maybe go to the development team and say, hey, we have this great feature available. Would you like to implement that as well? And sit with them together and try to work this feature out. Together with that, of course, always collect and work through feedback that you get from users. Even if it's just internally, it's quite important to integrate this feature as early as possible. We have, of course, we're using Jamf Pro, and we are also using self-service, and this is how it looks for us. So it's actually quite a lot of applications, as mentioned. We have 70 applications, and most of them are optional to be installed through the self-service. We are only pushing around 3 or 4 applications that are really needed for compliancy. And we also color-coded our apps, so users can, have their own structure if they want to have different application. The blue apps are productivity apps. The green apps are social applications. So if you want to communicate with someone, the yellow applications are sales application, and the purple apps are knowledge application. So with that, you can simply create color-coded folders, for example, and that makes it quite easy to use. And something else that's really important to us that is integrated in any application that we deliver is a feedback service. So the user can simply share any feedback they want to give to the developers. May it be a good thing or a bad thing. So if something is not working, they can just shake their phone and send the information to the developers. So that is for internal distribution. Now let's say you have an external distribution. Well, the basic concepts are the same, of course. Again, it's very important to make sure that apps, if you want to distribute them or sell them to organizations, you want to have an MDM awareness in your application. It will drive the user adoption and increase the user satisfaction in organizations by a lot. If you don't have to go through all the onboarding screen for all the applications again, that's a real benefit. You should distribute internally whenever it's possible. That will make sure that you have a good quality assurance within your application and that the app works the way you intend it to work. If you're ready to include the first external testers, make sure to use TestFlight for that. And also, of course, if you want to distribute the app, make sure to have an additional time planned in for the review time, because those can increase depending on the time you're planning to release your application. Also, if you try to sell your application only to specific organizations, you can do that through B2B, of course, as well. And with that, we went through the whole DevOps cycle, concluding in the distributing of apps. And with so you can leverage all the features that I just showed you, and make sure to see what fits best for you. And I really encourage you to look into these MDM features, as they will definitely increase the user satisfaction by a lot. We've had a lot of complaints about a few things, like, for example, every time I have to open the app, I have to log in. Let's just take the user email out of the AppConfig, and that problem was just solved. I hope you can enjoy the rest of your JNUC, and thank you very much for listening.